It really had no protection from the elements.
That's another place that when summer comes around again, we're all going to suffer and get out the pedestal fans.
There was no ceiling fans. There was sort of no reprieve in the upstairs bedrooms.
Because, you just can't get warm. There's no way to warm up.
Almost a dozen layers on me, and I'd wear, my flannel pajamas.
But you could kind of feel that heat radiating, that's for sure, downstairs.
Hi, you're listening to Rentability, a series brought to you by Renew. I'm Marla, and I'm so excited to be here and to be hosting this episode and this series for you guys. Here at Renew, we inspire, enable, and advocate for people to live sustainably in their homes and their communities. This series is dedicated to all you renters out there. We focus on how to be a sustainable renter because, let's be real, and no, I'm not talking about the app. The rental market is tough, and as we find out in this podcast, it's not always ideal. Join me as we unpack, revisit, and renew your rental experience. Welcome to episode 1 of Rentability. I've been in search for the best and simultaneously worst rental stories. And well, it's no surprise that many people had their own story or two. Listen in, as this is what Australians had to say. Our first story comes from Jeremy in South Australia. Prior to his current living arrangements, Jeremy has been renting for over 20 years. Through a private rental, he realised that there are many issues with the quality of housing.
The house was essentially made out of matchsticks. It was very poor performing thermally. It was a timber-framed house on stumps. It was weatherboard clad. It had no insulation in the walls, no insulation in the ceiling. It really had no protection from the elements. It was very, very cold in winter, extraordinarily hot in summer. And when it was windy, the house used to creak like a ship. I used to think it was like a sailing ship. And in the gully winds that used to come down off the hills, the house would shake and rattle at a night time. And then when it would rain, I'd hear dripping on the upper side of the ceiling, as well as water leaked through the corrugated iron. And when it would rain, it would also overflow. The gutters would overflow and flood the back part of the house, and water would come under the rear door into the kitchen.
Incredibly, he'd been renting here for 8 years and stayed because of his dogs and his kids. For many, a rental that allows pets is hard to find.
It was very convenient in terms of my kids and getting them to school as well. So that was the other thing. They were young and still at school. It was cheap. The rent was really cheap. The rent only went up $5 in that entire 8 years. And I think that's probably in recognition of how bad the house actually was.
You said the property was subject to inspections every 3 months, but did that help you at all?
I guess the thing that bugged me about that is that I'd sort of say, look, there's these things need to be done to the house, this, and this. And when the hot water system finally blew, it took them over a week to replace it. So, no hot water for a week. They acknowledged that there were things wrong with the house, but they weren't prepared to spend any money on it at all. So apart from the absolute basics. And so that's how it was.
So in terms of thermal comfort, I think you said that, in summer it would be extremely hot and in winter it was extremely cold. You could see your breath fog up and everything. How did you manage those situations? Like, how did you guys keep warm?
Thankfully, the house actually had ceiling fans. So in the living room and in the 3 bedrooms, it had ceiling fans. So that was at least one thing. It had a very small wall rattler air conditioner in the living room, but that could barely keep up with the heat. It just kind of was a bit asthmatic and would go, just blowing out very small amount of heat or cool. So it really didn't make a lot of difference. So in summer, you'd be wetting down the bed, you'd be lying on wet sheets, you'd be putting cold towels over you, running fans, just trying to keep cool, jumping in and out of a cold bath of water, for instance, just to try to cool off. I remember getting home one day when it was really hot, one of those sort of 40-degree days that we get in Adelaide, and opening up the front door of the house and just getting hit with this blast of hot air from inside the house. So, you're not that feeling, you're not coming home to anywhere that's safe. You're not coming home to a sanctuary. You're not coming home to somewhere that's going to actually protect you. You're coming home to something that's going to make the situation worse for you, particularly if you had a hot, stressful day. In winter, just layering and layering, mountaineering equipment, literally, wearing equipment that you'd wear if you're climbing up a snow-capped mountain inside the house. I remember getting up in the morning when, my breath would be frosting inside the house. There'd be condensation on the windows. It would be really damp as well, so damp and cold. Walking into the kitchen and turning on the oven and then sitting in front of the oven, eating my breakfast cereal sort of thing, trying to just get some warmth into my body.
The rental didn't have sufficient insulation and had no heating, so having to run oil or portable heaters was burning up money.
Knowing how much that costs to run in terms of electricity as well, and that there's no way that energy is staying inside the house, it just leaks out continuously.
And did you ever approach the landlords or the agent, anyone on the situation to see if they could change anything?
No. It was one of those things where, as a renter, you just want to fly under the radar as much as possible. You don't want to stick your head up. You don't want to make a fuss. I didn't want to be then, evicted because, I'd asked for something to be changed. I acknowledged that the rent was really low and, stayed low, I should say. The rent stayed low and I was able to have my pets. So that was the main thing for me.
I mean, why are these places still on the market is the question.
Because there's no minimum rental standards and there's no regulatory authority really that's got any real teeth to require landlords provide a standard of accommodation to Australian people, which just meets some degree of minimum standards. I mean, if the minimum standards that you can lock your front and back doors and you can cook a meal, if that's the minimum standard, I think we're really, really behind the eight ball with that.
Another house Jeremy lived in was literally falling down.
There were cracks in the walls that you could see daylight through. I'm talking like a 3 centimetre crack in the wall that you could actually look out through the wall into the backyard. There were other cracks around the fireplace with a brick chimney, which was separating from the house. So the crack started at the bottom of the chimney and then moved all the way up to the chimney. So at the top of it, it was probably about 15 centimetres away from the rest of the house, and bricks were hanging off.
So there you have it. Water, insulation, thermal comfort. They're all needed in a home. But when it's not a given, what happens? We're headed to Queensland for our next story. We're here with Brayden. Since moving out, he has lived in 4 rentals in Queensland and interstate. His first one he lived in for 9 months.
The very first one, fresh out the gate, that was at the end of January 2019. I moved into a place in Pacific Pines on the Gold Coast down there, and look, it was okay, but it was one of those ones, as soon as the sun crested the horizon, my poor little room was absolutely roasting, and as soon as the sun went away, I was freezing. I had a pedestal fan next to the bed for half the hours of the day and a portable heater for the other half of the day.
There were 2 air cons, and one was in the main living room, but none of these were energy efficient, so running them all day would have made no difference to the temperature.
Unless you were standing within that one, family room, living room space, it might as well not have existed.
And so when it got really hot, what were your ways to cool down?
Lose clothing rapidly. As I said, I had a pedestal fan that I just propped up and dragged along with me. God, I think I probably broke the water bill with just the sheer amount of water I was drinking all the time. I even got into a habit of freezing some, ice bottles, ice blocks, and just, using them to dab on myself like I was living in the 1800s.
And you guessed it. In winter, it wasn't much better.
I don't know what the word is for it, but those weird little tube sock things you put by the bottoms of your doors to try and, trap air in and all those sorts of bits and pieces. I threw those all around the house, and I basically was just constantly looking like an Eskimo wearing layers and layers and layers.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah, draft stoppers, I think.
Yes, that would be it.
Did the house have any kind of heating at all? Was the aircon with heating, or was it more you're just relying on your portable?
Just relying on the portable one. Yeah, it wasn't a dual function. It was just a, run-of-the-mill standard cold air only number.
No heating. 2 years ago. Imagine that. And while new minimum standards now prioritise heating, there is still lots to address. Brayden moved into a second rental where thankfully he had a reverse cycle air conditioner. But the place was still subject to extreme temperatures.
So summer was definitely more livable, but still capable of getting hot and sweltering unless that aircon was really firing away, basically. I was guaranteed to work up a sweat even with all the windows and the ceiling fans going. It wasn't exactly very well insulated.
Work lifestyle, including night shifts for Brayden, meant he had to contend with daytime temperatures while he was trying to sleep.
If I'm getting back home at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, trying to sleep for a night shift, that aircon's on, it's firing away all day long, just because, trying to sleep in the middle of summer when everyone else is making noise and the sun's up and it's hot and sweaty, you just have to bite that bullet and spend the money to make life more livable for work.
Did you ever speak to your landlords about the cooling and heating issues?
Had to get the aircon serviced and fixed when I first moved in, because who knows how long it had been left to rot away for. And the aircon upstairs, I had to basically bring up just the hygiene standards. It was riddled with mold. And I was like, not exactly my idea of a good time.
And while they took their sweet time, landlords were able to fix this issue. But not everyone is this lucky. Power imbalance between tenants and landlords is something many renters understand.
I know there are plenty of good real estate, agents and landlords out there, but my God, there seem to be a lot of shocking ones. I feel like there definitely has to be more, not so much accountability, but an even playing field in that sense. A landlord, a real estate agent is nothing without their renters. But that's the sad fact of the matter, that we've gotten to that stage where, with housing crisis and rental crisis and just cost of living crisis, I think people feel the need to just put up and deal with it rather than even try and broach that, bare minimum communication with their real estate, because that's just the status quo now. That's how things are, or how we perceive them to be. And the alternative is, again, I'm homeless or I'm living on someone else's couch, and it's much, much worse.
And finally, let's head down to Melbourne, where we're based and where our third story is from. I chatted to Erin, who's been renting for 11 years. And you could definitely say thermal comfort in her 2-story townhouse in North Melbourne was less than ideal.
The configuration was essentially that it had a north-facing rear courtyard with big glass sort of sliding door, so we got a lot of sun in there downstairs, which in winter was lovely. In summer, there was no real option for shading. The courtyard was completely paved and tend to turn into a bit of an oven.
2 rooms, including hers, were upstairs.
I would probably put money on the fact that I don't think there was any insulation in the ceiling, because the temperature difference, both in summer and winter, between upstairs and downstairs, I would say would be about 10 degrees.
The house had gas ducted heating, but only for the ground floor. And so I guess that was challenging because you lived there through lockdown and, you had to essentially work from home upstairs.
Yeah, we looked like we were working in the snow. In winter, we were kind of wearing our outdoor coats, wearing our beanies, cuddling mugs of hot beverages most of the day.
Erin had a Dyson heating and cooling fan that gave her some relief for those extreme temperatures, but she also took it a step further.
We did approach our landlord and ask for something to be done, namely air conditioning. We wanted a split system. That did end up going in downstairs. It was a very large unit, and that did go in downstairs. And yeah, sort of on the opposite wall. It wasn't even kind of pointing towards the stairs or anything. So what we found then is that the downstairs would end up like a refrigerator, and you'd walk upstairs and you'd feel like you're in an oven.
How did you feel knowing that, the air conditioning was on, but it wasn't really providing the long lasting effects? That would scare me. I would be, because I'm really stingy, I guess.
For me, knowing that the heating or the air conditioning was kind of on, but it wasn't, it basically only worked while it was on. As soon as it was turned off, it's as if you'd never had it on. Even if you'd had it on for a couple of hours, you turned it off and things were fine for maybe another 20 minutes, half an hour, and then you just felt the temperature start creeping back up again. It was really, really frustrating knowing that we didn't have the type of sort of well-built or well-structured house to maintain any sort of temperature, and we were essentially at the whim of whatever the weather was doing.
And before you mentioned that you actually went to the landlords, were they cooperative, it was, all fine? Because I know some people, when they talk about their stories, are like, oh, the landlords didn't do anything, there's no sort of conversation between the way they interact with tenants.
A landlord had a very DIY approach to any kind of request in our property. And so we sort of weren't really sure what our chances would be. But we also knew that it was during a pandemic, which meant that perhaps our chances were higher because there were a lot of empty rentals at that time, and a lot of people that had left Melbourne. So we sort of leaned into that a little bit and kind of used global circumstances to our advantage to say that, this is being that we will be working from home during a summer. We really feel that it's necessary that we have air conditioning to keep the place at a comfortable temperature. But even as I hear myself say that now, you shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to use a global pandemic as an excuse to have a comfortable home.
So all stories take us back to this need for a conversation between tenants and landlords and for ultimately better minimum standards. So working from home, as Erin described, is not over. It's on the rise. So many people are working from home now, and there is a necessity there to have a healthy home. So join us in episode 2 as we take a bit of a deep dive into how that might look like. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Big shout out to everyone who shared their story. It's been a pleasure, and I'll see you very shortly.